Bimbo's hand shot across Sandra's mouth before her mind could catch up to her body. The billionaire froze, eyes wide behind designer glasses, breath hot against the maid's trembling palm. Through the crack in the steady door, a voice drifted out, calm, cold, and unmistakably familiar. Chuck's. Finish it quietly tonight. Make it look natural, an accidental overdose. No one questions a sick woman taking too many pills. Sandra's body went rigid. Her fingernails dug into Bimbo's wrist, but the maid didn't let go. Couldn't let go. One sound, one breath, one word, and they were both dead. She can't give me a child, Chucks continued, his voice as smooth as polished marble. This marriage has served its purpose. It's time for a new life. The hallway felt impossibly narrow. The mansion, usually a cathedral of space and luxury, now pressed in like a coffin. Bimbo leaned close to Sandra's ear, her whisper so tight it barely disturbed the air. Don't speak. 12 hours earlier, Bimbo had been invisible. She moved through Sandra's Lagos mansion the way all good maids do, silently, efficiently, without disturbing the air. At 5 a.m., while the city still slept beneath its blanket of heat and exhaust, she was already folding towels, brewing coffee, polishing marble that would only be walked on once. She had learned to be a shadow. It was safer that way. 3 years ago, when fever took both her parents in the same cruel week, Bimbo had learned that the world did not stop for grief. Bills still came, landlords still knocked, hunger still gnawed. Sandra had found her outside a church, thin as a rumor, asking for work, any work. The billionaire tech mogul had studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. You'll start Monday. Don't be late, and don't steal. Firm, but fair. That was Sandra. No warmth, but no cruelty either. In a world that had offered Bimbo nothing but closed doors, that was enough. So Bimbo became part of the architecture, present but unseen, essential but unacknowledged, until the night she heard too much, until the night the billionaire's life became hers to save, until the moment her hand flew to her boss's mouth and everything changed forever. The alarm never rang because Bimbo never needed it. Her body woke at 4:47 a.m. every morning, 3 minutes before the phone would buzz. It was a skill poverty had taught her. Sleep light, wake early, never miss the bus that wouldn't wait. She slipped from her narrow bed in the staff quarters, a room barely larger than Sandra's walk-in closet. The concrete floor was cool against her bare feet. Outside, Lagos was still dark, the sky a bruised purple that hadn't yet decided to become day. By 5 a.m., she was already in the kitchen. Coffee first. Sandra took hers black, no sugar, hot enough to burn. Bimbo had learned to brew it exactly 7 minutes before the billionaire's footsteps echoed down the marble staircase. Not too early, it would cool. Not too late, Sandra would wait. Precision was survival. While the coffee percolated, Bimbo's hands moved through the routine like prayer. Wipe the counters, arrange the fruit bowl, fold the linen napkins into perfect triangles. Every surface gleamed, every item sat exactly where it belonged. She had learned this dance from her mother. Mama had been a maid too before the fever came, before the wind that blew through their small flat in Mushin turned from cool to cold to deadly. Bimbo remembered her mother's cough, wet and rattling like stones tumbling in a metal can. Then her father's, 2 days later. The same sound, the same decline. The clinic had no beds. The hospital wanted money they didn't have. Within a week, both her parents were gone, carried away by something the doctors called pneumonia, but Bimbo thought of as a fading wind. One moment they were there, solid, real, alive. The next, they were just air and memory. She was 19, alone, with rent due and a landlord who didn't accept grief as payment. The inheritance was nothing, a few worn clothes, a Bible with her mother's name written inside, and the knowledge of how to make a home shine even when your own heart was dark. Bimbo poured Sandra's coffee into the fine china cup and carried it on a silver tray to the breakfast room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the first light touched the swimming pool, turning the water from black to gold. Sometimes, early like this, Bimbo allowed herself to imagine what it felt like to own all of this, to never count naira, to never wake at 4:47 a.m. because missing the bus meant missing the day's wages. But imagination was dangerous. It made you forget your place. So she set down the coffee, smoothed her uniform, and disappeared back into the shadows where she belonged, silent, efficient, essential, and utterly invisible. The way a good maid should be. The way she would remain until the night she heard Chuck's planning murder through a study door. Chuck's arrived home at noon, which meant he'd spent the morning at the airfield. Bimbo heard the car first, the low purr of the Mercedes pulling into the circular driveway, tires crunching over imported gravel that cost more than most people's annual salary. She was upstairs, changing the sheets in the guest bedroom, when his voice drifted up from the foyer. Smooth, charming, performative. "Sandra, darling, you look tired. Did you sleep at all?" There was concern in his tone, the kind that sounded genuine if you weren't listening closely. But Bimbo had learned to listen closely. In a house this large, survival meant paying attention to the things people said when they thought no one was listening. Chuck's was handsome in the way that opened doors. Tall, sharp-jawed, with the kind of easy smile that made people forget to ask questions. He wore suits that fit like they'd been painted on, Italian leather shoes that clicked against marble like a metronome, and a watch that could have fed a family for a year. Sandra had married him 5 years ago, back when loneliness felt heavier than caution. He'd courted her with poetry and private flights, weekend trips to Paris, promises whispered over champagne at 30,000 feet. He was a pilot, he'd told her, a man who understood freedom, a man who could show her the world from above. What he hadn't told her was that he understood leverage even better. Bimbo had watched him over the past 3 years, the way you watch storm clouds gathering on the horizon. At first, she'd told herself she was imagining things. Chuck's was polite to the staff. He remembered names. He tipped generously during the holidays. But there were moments. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes when Sandra discussed business. The sharp laugh he released when she mentioned expanding her tech company into new markets. A sound like glass breaking in another room. The phone calls he took in corners, his voice dropping to a murmur, his body turned away like a door closing. And then there was the way he looked at Sandra when she wasn't watching. Not with love, not even with hate. With calculation, like she was a problem he was solving, an equation with too many variables, an obstacle that could be removed with the right amount of planning. Bimbo folded the final pillowcase and placed it precisely on the bed. Through the window, she could see the private jet hangar in the distance, a silver tooth against the Lagos skyline. Chuck spent half his life there, flying to places he never mentioned, meeting people whose names never appeared at dinner. Sandra called it his passion. Bimbo called it an escape route. Downstairs, his laughter rang out again, that sharp, crystalline sound that made the hairs on Bimbo's arms stand up. She told herself she was being paranoid, that grief had made her suspicious, that not every handsome man in an expensive suit was dangerous. But 3 days later, standing frozen in a hallway with her hand over Sandra's mouth, Bimbo would realize her instincts had been right all along. Some predators don't hunt in the shadows. They hunt in broad daylight, wearing Italian leather and a perfect smile. The towels were heavier than usual, or maybe Bimbo's arms were just tired. She'd been running since morning. Sandra had guests coming for dinner, which meant every bathroom needed fresh linens, every surface needed to shine, every detail needed to be perfect. It was 7 p.m. when Bimbo finally carried the last stack of Egyptian cotton toward the upstairs linen closet, her shoulders burning, her feet aching in her worn flats. The study door was half open. She wouldn't have stopped, wouldn't have paid attention except for the tone of Chuck's voice. Low, controlled, the way people speak when they're saying things that shouldn't be heard. Bimbo slowed her steps, her arms tightening around the towels. Can't wait any longer. She's getting suspicious. A pause. Then, No, she hasn't said anything directly, but I can feel it, the way she watches me now. Bimbo's heart kicked against her ribs. She should keep walking, should pretend she heard nothing. Invisible shadows don't eavesdrop on their employers' private conversations. But her feet had stopped moving. The plan is simple, Chucks continued, his voice casual, like he was discussing dinner reservations. Tonight, after the guests leave, she already takes sleeping pills for her insomnia. A few extra crushed into her nightcap. No one would question it. Wealthy woman, stressed, health problems, accidental overdose. They practically write themselves. The towel slipped an inch in Bimbo's grip. She caught them before they fell, her pulse thundering in her ears. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. She can't give me a child, Chuck said, and now there was something cold and final in his tone. This marriage has served its purpose. Once she is gone, everything transfers to me as her husband, the company, the properties, the accounts. I've already spoken to the lawyers. It's airtight. Bimbo's breath came in shallow, silent gasps. Her mind raced through the impossible mathematics of what she was hearing. Sandra, kind, firm, fair Sandra, who'd given her a job when no one else would. Sandra, who never raised her voice but always paid on time. Sandra, who was about to be murdered by the man she'd married. Make sure you're ready on your end, Chuck said. I'll call you after it's done. We can finally start that new life we've been planning. There was a woman. Of course there was a woman. Bimbo heard movement, the creak of a leather chair, footsteps approaching the door. Panic flooded her system. If he found her here, if he knew she'd heard... She moved, fast and silent, pressing herself against the wall beside the doorframe. The towels felt like concrete in her arms. Her entire body was shaking. Chucks's footsteps paused just inside the study. Tonight, he said softly. It ends tonight. Then he walked out, turning left toward the master bedroom, his Italian shoes clicking away like a countdown. Bimbo stood frozen in the hallway, clutching a stack of towels that suddenly felt like the weight of a life in her hands. Sandra's life, and she had maybe 3 hours to save it. Bimbo found Sandra in the East Wing, inspecting the dining table settings for guests who would never arrive. The billionaire stood in her blue lace dress, the one Chucks had bought her for the anniversary, adjusting a wine glass that was already perfectly placed. Her movements were mechanical, distracted. She looked tired, fragile in a way that wealth couldn't protect against. Madam, Bimbo's voice came out hoarse. She cleared her throat and tried again. Madam, I need to speak with you. It's urgent. Sandra glanced up, one eyebrow raised behind her glasses. Can it wait? The Adiemis will be here in... No, the word came out sharper than Bimbo intended. It cannot wait. Something in her tone made Sandra pause. She set down the wine glass and turned fully, studying the maid with the attention she usually reserved for quarterly reports. What is it? Bimbo opened her mouth, but the words tangled in her throat. How did you tell someone their husband was planning to kill them? How did you break a woman's world apart with a single sentence? It's about Mr. Chucks, she managed. I overheard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from the direction of the study. Bimbo's blood turned to ice. Sandra turned toward the sound, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion. That must be him, Sandra said, already moving toward the hallway. I should tell him about the seating arrangements. No, Bimbo's hand shot out, grabbing Sandra's wrist. The touch was electric, forbidden. Maids didn't grab billionaires. Shadows didn't reach for the light. But Bimbo held on. Sandra's eyes went wide with shock and the beginning of anger. Bimbo, what on earth? The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then Chucks' voice drifted toward them, low and satisfied, still on the phone. Finish it quietly tonight. Make it look natural, an accidental overdose. No one questions a sick woman taking too many pills. Sandra froze, her face drained of color, the blue lace dress suddenly the only bright thing about her. Bimbo's hand flew to Sandra's mouth before the scream could form. She felt the billionaire's breath hot and rapid against her palm, felt the body go rigid with shock and disbelief. Don't speak. Bimbo's whisper was breath-tight, desperate. pressed directly against Sandra's ear. "He'll hear you. He'll know we know." Through the archway, Chuck's shadow appeared, lengthening across the marble floor like a stain. He was pacing, still talking, still planning, oblivious to the two women pressed against the wall 20 feet away. "She can't give me a child. This marriage has served its purpose. It's time for a new life." Sandra's fingernails dug into Bimbo's wrist, drawing blood, but the maid didn't let go, couldn't let go. One sound, one movement, one breath released at the wrong moment, and they were both dead. Tears streamed down Sandra's face behind her glasses, but she'd stopped struggling. Her eyes met Bimbo's, and in that moment, something shifted. The hierarchy collapsed. The distance dissolved. Maid and Billionaire became simply two women hiding in a hallway, listening to a man plan murder. Two women who had to survive the night, together. They waited in Sandra's private study, the door locked from the inside, the lights off. Bimbo had guided Sandra there after Chuck's footsteps faded toward the west wing, after the Billionaire's legs finally remembered how to move. Sandra had collapsed into her leather chair, shaking so violently her glasses slipped down her nose. She made no move to adjust them. "He's going to kill me," she whispered. Not a question, a fact she was still learning to accept. Bimbo held beside the chair, her phone already in her trembling hands. She dialed 112, the emergency line, and spoke in a voice she barely recognized as her own. "Please, someone is planning to murder my employer. Tonight. We need help. Now." The operator had asked questions, too many questions. Address, names, nature of the threat. "How do you know this? Are you safe right now?" Bimbo had answered them all, her words tumbling over each other, desperate and raw. Sandra had taken the phone at some point, her voice hollow but steady, confirming everything. "Yes, this is Sandra Okonkwo. Yes, I'm in danger. Yes, please send someone." And now they waited. The study felt like a tomb. Outside the window, Lego sprawled in its usual chaos, traffic humming, generators rumbling, life continuing as if the world wasn't ending inside this mansion. Bimbo could hear Chuck's moving through the house, opening doors, closing them, his footsteps a metronome counting down to something terrible. "Where are they?" Sandra's voice cracked. "Why aren't they here yet?" "They're coming," Bimbo said, though she didn't know if she believed it. Lego's police were unpredictable, sometimes swift, sometimes absent entirely. And what if they didn't believe them? What if they arrived and Chuck smiled his perfect smile, offered them money, convinced them it was all a misunderstanding? What if rich men in Italian suits could talk their way out of anything? Sandra stood suddenly, pacing to the window. "I need to see him. I need to ask him why. How could he? We've been married for 5 years. 5 years, and I never—" "Madam, please." Bimbo moved to block her path. "We have to stay here. We have to wait." "Wait for what? For him to come looking for us? To realize we're hiding? To finish what he started?" The words hung in the air like smoke. And then, distant but growing closer, a sound cut through the Lagos night. Sirens. They wove through the streets like silver snakes, high and wailing, cutting through traffic and distance, getting louder, getting closer. Bimbo's knees nearly buckled with relief. Sandra pressed her forehead against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "They're coming! Oh God, they're really coming!" The sirens grew from whispers to screams. Blue and red light began to strobe through the windows, painting the study walls in flashes of color. Car doors slammed, voices shouted, heavy boots hit gravel. Somewhere in the house, Chuck's footsteps stopped. Bimbo heard his voice, confused and sharp. "What's going on? Why are there police?" Sandra turned from the window, her face illuminated by the flashing lights. The tears were gone. The shock had hardened into something else. Rage. "Now," she said quietly, "he'll answer for it." Chuck stood in the foyer, backlit by the chandelier, when Sandra and Bimbo emerged from the study with 4 police officers flanking them. He looked perfect, composed, his suit unwrinkled, his hair perfectly styled, that easy smile already forming on his lips. When he saw the police, he didn't flinch, didn't panic. Instead, he spread his hands in a gesture of confused hospitality. "Officers, I'm not sure what this is about, but there must be some mistake. I'm Charles O'Coffer, Mrs. Okonkwo's husband. Is there a problem?" The lead officer, a tall woman with sergeant stripes and eyes that had seen too many liars, stepped forward. "Mr. O'Coffer, we received a report that you were planning to harm your wife. We need to ask you some questions." Chucks laughed, not the sharp laugh Bimbo had learned to fear, but something warm and bewildered. He was good, so good. Harm Sandra? That's absurd. Who would say such a... His eyes found Bimbo, standing half hidden behind Sandra's shoulder. The mask didn't falter, but something flickered in his gaze. Ah, the maid, of course. He turned back to the sergeant, his tone shifting to something between amusement and pity. "Officer, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Our staff number here is new to the household. Perhaps she overheard a phone conversation and misinterpreted. I've been here 3 years, and I didn't misinterpret anything." Chuck's smile tightened at the edges. Sandra stepped forward, removing her glasses to wipe them, a gesture Bimbo recognized as her way of buying time to steady her voice. "Tell them what you said on the phone, Chucks, about the sleeping pills, about the accidental overdose. Sandra, darling, you're not well. You know you've been under stress, the insomnia, the medication. Tell them about the woman, the new life you're planning once I'm gone." The mask cracked. It was small at first, just a twitch at the corner of his mouth, a flash of something cold in his eyes. But Bimbo saw it. The sergeant sighed. "This is ridiculous," Chuck said, and now there was an edge to his words. "You're going to believe a maid and my mentally unstable wife over me? I'm a respected pilot. I have connections. I know people who can make evidence disappear?" The sergeant's voice was steel. "Sir, we recorded your wife's emergency call. We have testimony from 2 witnesses. And right now, you're about to add threatening an officer to your list of problems." Chuck's confident smirk collapsed like wet paper. What replaced it was fury, pure, undisguised fury. "You stupid bitch," he hissed, and Bimbo wasn't sure if he meant Sandra or her. "That money was mine. I earned it, putting up with you for 5 years. You and your... Mr. O'Coffer, you're under arrest." The sergeant nodded to her officers. "Attempted murder conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." The handcuffs clicked into place like a sound of breaking bone. Chucks thrashed once, his Italian shoes scraping marble, his perfect hair finally falling out of place. "This isn't over. You hear me, Sandra? This isn't..." But the officers were already dragging him toward the door, past the imported gravel, past the Mercedes that would sit unused in the driveway, past the life he thought was his for the taking. The press conference happened 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, when Lagos was already sweating under an unforgiving sun. Bimbo stood backstage at Sandra's tech company headquarters, wearing a dress she'd never dreamed of owning, cream silk with gold threading, tailored to fit her like it had been grown from her skin. Sandra had insisted on it, had taken her shopping past the street vendors Bimbo knew, into stores with security guards and air conditioning cold enough to make her shiver. "You're not hiding anymore," Sandra had said in the boutique's mirror. "Not ever again." Now, watching through a gap in the curtain as journalists filled the auditorium, Bimbo felt her stomach twist with something between terror and disbelief. News cameras, microphones, hundreds of eyes, all about to turn toward her. "Madam, I don't think I can do this," she whispered. Sandra stood beside her, transformed in the past 3 weeks, from a woman on the edge of death to something harder, sharper. The trial was coming. Chuck sat in his cell awaiting judgment, but Sandra had stopped crying 2 weeks ago. Now she only moved forward. "Yes, you can." Sandra adjusted Bimbo's collar with the precise touch she once used for business deals. "You saved my life. The least I can do is give you one worth living." The moderator's voice echoed through the auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Sandra Okonkwo. Sandra walked onto the stage to a thunder of camera flashes. She stood at the podium, waiting for silence, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd looked death in the face and walked away. 3 weeks ago, my husband tried to kill me. He planned it carefully, methodically. He would have succeeded. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Bimbo watched reporters lean forward, pens moving frantically. I'm alive today because of one person, not because of my wealth, not because of my position, but because a young woman who had every reason to stay invisible chose to step into the light, chose to risk everything to save me. Sandra turned toward the curtain, extended her hand. Bimbo, come here. Bimbo's feet moved before her mind could stop them. The lights were blinding. The stage felt like walking on water. But Sandra's hand was solid and warm, and when Bimbo reached her, the billionaire didn't let go. This is Bimbo Adeyemi, Sandra said to the cameras, to Lagos, to the world. Some of you might think of her as my former employee, but as of today, I'm formally adopting her as my daughter. Not in gratitude, not in charity, but because she showed me something I'd forgotten, that family isn't blood, it's choice. The cameras exploded in flashes. Questions erupted from every direction, but Sandra raised her free hand, silencing them. I'm enrolling her in the University of Lagos, full scholarship, business administration. When she graduates, she'll have a position in my company, not because I'm giving it to her, but because she's earned the right to build her own future. Sandra looked at Bimbo, and there were tears in her eyes behind those glasses. She saved my life. Now I'm giving her one. A life in gold, not shadow. A life where she never has to be invisible again. Bimbo couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stand there as the auditorium erupted in applause that sounded like thunder, like redemption, like a door opening into a future she'd never dared imagine. Daughter. The word settled into her chest like sunlight. 4 years passed like pages turning in a book Bimbo had once thought she'd never get to read. The University of Lagos became her new home, lecture halls instead of linen closets, textbooks instead of towels. She studied the way she'd once cleaned, with precision, dedication, and the knowledge that nothing could be taken for granted. Business administration, marketing strategy, financial management, words that had once belonged to people like Sandra now belonged to her, too. On graduation day, the sun hung heavy over the campus, turning the ceremony grounds into a sea of gold and green. Bimbo stood in line wearing her cap and gown, clutching her honor certificate with hands that no longer shook when holding important things. Bimbo Okonkwo Adeyemi, first class honors. The name still felt new on her tongue. Okonkwo Adeyemi, a bridge between two lives. 2 women who'd saved each other in a hallway 4 years ago. Sandra stood when Bimbo crossed the stage, applauding so loudly that other families turned to look. She'd aged in those 4 years, more gray in her hair, more lines around her eyes, but the grief had finally loosened its grip. She'd learned to smile again, carefully, like someone testing weight on a healed bone. Beside Sandra sat Tunde. Bimbo's eyes found him in the crowd, and he grinned that crooked grin that had first caught her attention in their economics class 2 years ago. Tunde, who didn't care that she'd once been a maid, who loved that she still woke at 4:47 a.m., old habits dying hard, who understood that some shadows never fully disappear, they just learn to walk beside you in the light. After the ceremony, they gathered under an acacia tree, Sandra, Tunde, and Bimbo, still in her graduation gown. Your parents would be proud, Sandra said quietly, adjusting Bimbo's collar the way she always did. Your mother especially. Bimbo nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. She thought of Mama often, wondered what she'd think of the silk dresses, the university degree, the daughter who'd been a shadow and became gold. wondered if somehow, wherever the fading wind had taken her parents, they knew she'd survived. "I start at the company Monday," Bimbo said. "Marketing division, junior executive." "You earned it." Sandra's voice was firm, every bit of it. Tunde slipped his hand into Bimbo's, and she squeezed back, grateful for the anchor. But even here, in this moment of triumph, there was a shadow at the edge of everything. The trial had ended a year ago. Chucks sat in Kirikiri maximum security prison, sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder. Justice had been served, the newspaper said. But Bimbo still checked locks twice before sleeping, still tensed when she heard footsteps in empty hallways, still woke sometimes at 4:47 a.m., heart pounding, hand reaching for a phone to call police who'd already come. Some rescues saved your life, but couldn't erase the memory of nearly losing it. Sandra seemed to sense her thoughts. She touched Bimbo's cheek, the gesture maternal and sure. The past lingers, but it doesn't get to write the ending. Bimbo looked at her diploma, at Tunde, at Sandra, at the future spreading before her like dawn over Lagos. No, she thought, we write the ending. And it was just beginning. Sandra went to Kirikiri prison on a Thursday morning, 5 years after the night that nearly ended her life. Bimbo had offered to come with her, but Sandra had shaken her head. "This is something I need to do alone. One last conversation. Then I can finally let it go." The prison was exactly as bleak as Sandra had imagined. Concrete walls stained with rain and time. Guards with faces hardened by years of watching humanity at its worst. She sat in the visiting room, hands folded on the metal table, waiting. When Chucks walked in, she barely recognized him. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by faded prison khakis. The perfect hair had grayed and thinned. The confident posture had collapsed into something hunched and defensive. But the eyes, those were the same, still calculating even now, still looking for angles. He sat across from her, handcuffs clinking against the table. "Sandra," his voice was rough, used to gentleness. "I didn't think you'd ever come." "I wasn't sure I would either." She kept her hands still, refusing to fidget. 5 years ago, she would have been trembling. Now she was just tired. But I realized I couldn't move forward until I let go of this weight. Chucks leaned back, and something like his old smirk flickered across his face. "Come to gloat? Tell me how well you're doing without me?" "No." Sandra reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. She slid it across the table. "I came to give you this." He stared at it like it might bite. "What is it?" "A check. 1 million naira. Enough to hire a better lawyer. Enough to appeal your sentence, maybe get it reduced. Enough to start over when you're released, if you use it wisely." Chucks's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely confused. "Why would you, after everything I did?" "Because holding on to hate was killing me slower than you ever could have." Sandra's voice was steady, clear. "I've spent 5 years letting anger poison everything good in my life. Every success felt hollow because I was still chained to you, to that night, to what you tried to take from me." She stood, smoothing her dress. "This isn't about you deserving mercy. It's about me deserving peace. I'm not giving you this money to absolve you. I'm giving it to free myself." Chuck stared at the envelope, then at her, and something cracked in his expression. Not the fury from the arrest, something smaller, more human. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for what it's worth. It's worth something." Sandra picked up her purse. "Not everything, but something." She walked toward the door, each step lighter than the last. "Sandra," Chuck's voice stopped her at the threshold. "Bimbo, she's more than okay. She graduated top of her class. She's getting married next month. She's everything you'll never be. Someone who chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier." Sandra looked back one final time at the man who'd tried to erase her. "Goodbye, Chucks. I hope you find whatever peace people like you are capable of finding." Outside, the Lagos sun was brutal and bright, but Sandra didn't mind. She walked to her car, got in, and sat for a moment in the silence. Then she started the engine and drove away from Kitty Kitty, from the past, from the poison. Drove toward home, where Bimbo was waiting with wedding plans and laughter. Drove toward the rest of her life. Free.